Good afternoon. They shake hands and pay each other friendly visits. They undermine liberal values and express similar views on the legal system and the media. But mainly they share the values of ethno-nationalism and a deep dislike of the other, the refugees, especially Islam and the EU. And even the historical memory of Holocaust, the central part of Israel's right-wing rhetoric, doesn't stay on the way of this unholy alliance. Over the past decade, Europe's far-right and populist parties, some with roots in Nazi and fascist movements of the past, have found a surprising bedfellow in the Middle East, the Israeli governments, specifically one that was led during the last 12 years by Benjamin Netanyahu, but as I will show you now, actually this phenomenon started earlier, before Netanyahu time. At the beginning of rapprochement, about 20 years ago, it was marked by the visit of Gianfranco Fini, the Italian far-right politician, to Israel. The meetings were still kept in secret. At the time, the right wing in Israel still had some red lines that it didn't cross. During these 2 decades, the relations between Israel and the extreme right in Europe continued to grow closer, despite the very significant criticism on behalf of the Jewish communities in Europe, and in violation of the Israeli Foreign Ministry official policy that shuns most or almost every far-right parties in Europe. In 2018, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, at the time I was a member of Knesset, and this story was, of course, made waves in the Knesset and outside of that. He met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, he strengthened ties with nationalist Polish government, and received a visit from Matteo Salvini, the leader of the far-right Northern League of Italy. At the same time, his advisors and members of his parties at the Knesset expressed their support for Spain's Vox and for Marine Le Pen in France. They met with Heinz Christian Strache, the former leader of the Freedom Party of Europe, them visiting Vienna, and his party representatives and himself visiting Israel and Jerusalem. There are many reasons for this mutual attraction between the right-wing government, consecutive right-wing governments in Israel, most of them led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and the extreme right in Europe. The extreme right in Europe, as we can see it from Israel, is looking for allies outside of EU who share its views on refugees, human rights, and nationalism, and at the same time, they offer to Israel protection of EU criticism of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. There is also another aspect of this unholy alliance. When populism and ultranationalism gains traction in global politics, and the far right retains more voters than ever, the tactical collaboration between Israel and the far right in Europe is evolving into a strategic alliance with regional and global implications, and with other partners far beyond the European continent. Over the years, the opposition in Israel, which also includes Holocaust survivors, left-wing parties, professional diplomats, and many other people who care, had failed to prevent or to correct the new direction that was taken by the Israeli right on the European policy. The sharp, often inflammatory criticism of the EU due to its support of the Palestinians in the West Bank, also in Gaza, was often heard in the Knesset. It was voiced out by various Israeli representatives of the government, in the media, and in the most important committees, such as the Committee for Foreign Affairs and Defense, that I was a member of between 2015 and 2019. You could find time and again meetings that were convened actually not by Knesset members, but by the extra right-wing movement, such as Regavim, that through their representatives in the Knesset were managing to call for meetings of the committee that are dedicated to the dangerous European support of the Palestinians in the sea territories. This is just one name of many that took part at the time. In February 2018, Yehuda Glick, then a Likud member of Knesset, met with Austrian Vice-Chancellor Heinz Christian Strache, head of the FPO, and then also with Austrian Foreign Minister Karim Kneisi. He had taken this step despite the official policy of his own party, of his own Prime Minister, Netanyahu, not to maintain contact, direct contact with FPO officials. And at the time, it was also the policy of the Foreign Ministry. I believe it is unchanged now, but the interesting thing is that at the time, the Foreign Ministry was led by no other than Benjamin Netanyahu. After this meeting, the sky didn't fall. The member of Knesset was not even reprimanded for that. And Glick, a colorful figure, best known for his involvement with Jewish Messianic groups that wished to pray on the Temple Mount, he also ignored the outcry that came from the Austrian Jewish Committee that sent letters to every member of the Knesset and urged them to cancel the meeting at once. The community leaders sent him documents proving that the Strache's party, or at least its fringes, is openly anti-Semitic and that it did not shed completely its dark past. Glick dismissed this information as irrelevant and even inappropriate and manipulated. He later defended his decision, writing on his private Twitter account, "Israel is turning the world upside down to fight against the boycott of Israel, the BDS. But at the same time, Israel is boycotting, BDSing, a party in Austria that was elected by 25% of the voters and has 40% of the ministers in the government." Glick, of course, as you can understand, was not the first Israeli politician to meet Strache, nor will he be the last one. In 2014, another MK from the Likud and also minister, Ofir Akunis, met with a delegation from Vlaams Belang, Flemish Interests, party led by Philip de Winter, although this party was shunned for years by the Israeli embassy in Belgium, as well as by the local Jewish community. Akunis posted details of this meeting on social media, noting that he was pleased to continue to be a spokesman for Israel without apologizing or squirming. In 2017, another Likud member, Oren Hazen, announced his support, whatever it means, for Marine Le Pen's presidential candidacy in France. I guess it didn't help a lot. Netanyahu's government also kept close ties with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban during his visit to Budapest in July 2018. Also in the midst of the campaign against George Soros, Netanyahu praised Orban, calling him one of the few true friends of Israel and of the Jewish nation. It later became public that Netanyahu's political advisors had assisted Orban in his aggressive political campaign against George Soros. Even when Orban described Miklos Horthy, who was jointly responsible for anti-Semitic laws and the deportation of some 400,000 Hungarian Jews to concentration camps, he described them as extraordinary statements. The Israeli foreign minister and the office of the prime minister did not protest against that. Another Visegrad group state with which Netanyahu maintained close ties is Poland. Disagreements in these close relations only arose when Poland passed a law in early 2018 that criminalizes the claims of Polish involvement in the Holocaust. But, of course, the ties with the far European right didn't start with Netanyahu. I mentioned earlier the high-profile visit of Gianfranco Fini to Jerusalem. This is what the apologists of his visits and of ties with the European far right wrote at the time. The article was published in 2003 in the financial newspaper, the Israeli newspaper of Globes. But what does it matter if Fini wants to clear himself through support of Israel? First of all, that's not bad if an ambitious European political thinker believes that anti-Semitism will harm his career. That is far superior to ambitious politicians who think anti-Semitism will benefit their careers. In the days when most of Europeans close their eyes in the face of manifestations of anti-Semitism, the case of Fini should warm our hearts. Okay, so this was, of course, not the only praise of Fini that was published these days, and people took it to great length to explain why Israel should approach, with Fini and his likes in Europe and actually across the world. 15 years after Fini's first visit to Israel, there were after that a few others, Netanyahu warmly received then Israeli Interior Minister and Deputy Minister Matteo Salvini, who was unwilling to see the victory over fascism in Italy as cause for celebration. On the day of Spain 2019 general election, Eli Hasan, the head of Foreign Affairs chamber in the Netanyahu Likud party, tweeted that he supported the far-right Vox party. Later, under pressure, he deleted the tweet and apologized for this content. In March 2018, we know that Vox had put Fernando Paz up as a candidate for the general elections in the city of Albacete. And Paz had called the Nuremberg trials as a mistake. He accepts that historical account of Holocaust is wrong, and also has close ties with Phalange, a fascist and anti-Semitic party. The members of the Knesset of the Likud argued that it was merely a realpolitik strategy to best protect Israel's interests in Europe. Alongside the Likud, a very significant actor that played a tremendous role in developing the ties between Israel and the European far right, it is a settlers' lobby. It became a major player that pushed aggressively for the rapprochement between Israel and the far right. During the visit to Israel in 2017, Strache actually condemned the EU decision to label goods from the settlements. And he said that he and his party cannot tolerate this decision. Of course, they were praised very significantly in the mainstream media in Israel that disregarded completely the controversy around Strache and around his party. The meeting in 2014 between Minister Akunis and the leading members of the Vlaams Belang party was actually organized by no other than the chairman of the regional council in the north of the occupied West Bank, Gershon Mesika, and his deputy, Yossi Dagan. The two, of course, represent the settler lobby inside the Likud party. Ex-foreign minister Avigdor Lieberman, who now serves in the current government as the Minister of Finance, and he's the leader of the right-wing Israel Our Home party that is supported by many Russian-speaking Israelis, had a series of unofficial meetings with leaders of the extreme right in Europe while he was a foreign minister, in which he explored the possibility of expanding the alliance. According to Ran Etzion, a friend of mine who used to serve as the deputy chairman of the National Security Council and also former chairman of the Israeli Foreign Ministry Policy Planning Department, big changes happened during Lieberman's tenure in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Even before that, there were unofficial isolated contacts with these fringe groups. But during Lieberman's tenure, there was a complete congruence between the political interests of the governing coalition and the foreign policy. So neither Lieberman nor Netanyahu as foreign ministers changed the official policy of the Israeli Foreign Ministry on neo-fascist and far-right political parties and movements in Europe. Unofficially, however, they worked very hard to establish and maintain connections with them. But other parties that are praised by the Israeli right as being pro-Israeli are really pro-Israeli. So usually, what we understand is that these populist far-right parties, they are not genuinely pro-Israeli, and they generally do not advocate for the broader goal of liberal and democratic Israel. Israel actually became the cause célèbre for the anti-Islamic politicians around the world. And here, the interests, of course, coincide between the Israel right and between the European far right. Relations between the politicians from a liberal democracy, which Israel still is, and those from the right wing of the most far right wing ultra-nationalist movements and party are very problematic. And however, it should not be forgotten that also in recent years, Israel has been moving more and more to the direction of illiberal democracy. We are not there yet, but we are actually going and approaching this goal very quickly, or at least we were until a year ago. During the last year, with the new government that is led by Naftali Bennett and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yair Lapid, They were not open and publicized meetings between the far-right organizations and groups and parties from Europe and the members of the Israeli government. Also, you have to understand that not everyone in Israel is excited about these new connections, to say the least. The late Israeli President Shimon Peres avoided meetings with leading members of the European far-right parties. President Reuven Rivlin basically continued with this line and said openly that Israel should stay away from the far-right. He also avoided meeting with Matteo Salvini and also later with the President Jair Bolsonaro. The opposition in Israel has frequently expressed its disapproval of the growing and deepening ties with the far-right and the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Various lobby groups that operate in the Knesset suggested that these new friends stand for, or at least sympathize with, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, extreme nationalism, and xenophobia. For years, it was considered by not only the right wing in Israel and some messianic groups that only seek support for their cause to pray on the Temple Mount. The belief was that if there is a threat to Jews in Europe, then this threat is coming from the Muslim communities in Europe. And if the far right is advocating against the expanding of these communities and criticizing their attacks against the Jews, then there is some point of convergence when Israel and the European far right can actually work together against anti-Semitism. And you will ask me, what about the Holocaust? Well, when arguing, and I had a few of these personal accounts during my time in the Knesset, when you pose a question to people who just came from the meeting, from Strache or Salvini or representative of the Spanish Vox, then they will tell you, listen, let the bygones be bygones. Today, there's different times. The threat that is looming on the Jewish nation, and especially to the Jews who live in Europe, is coming from another direction. And as the quote says, that I quoted before from the Globe's newspaper, then there is no problem if somebody wants to purge himself in Europe while making their approachment to Israel and to the Jews. It's safe to say that although we did had some positive developments during the last year, there's been exactly 12 months of the new Israeli government that is experiencing right now a very severe political crisis. And probably the elections, are looming ahead of us. In Israel, there are only two seasons. It's the Hamsin and the elections. So the Hamsin is over, now it's elections. The direction, although, of the right-wing parties in Israel is very troubling. And it's safe to assume that the Likud party and also the settler lobby that is active, of course, not only in this party, but also in other far-right parties, will push for these ties to become even closer for the coming years. After the elections in the United States, it was clear that the main backer of this alliance, Donald Trump, is gone, and it, of course, also weakened the position, or so it was seen in Israel, also weakened the position of his allies in the extreme and far right in Europe as well. But we know that the positions and the convenience of having an alternative European friends that would not criticize Israel over settlements, that would not criticize Israel over evacuation of Masafer Yatta villages in the southern Hebron Hills, that will not label the products that were produced in the West Bank, and basically that they will praise the settlers, they will praise the spirit of Israel, and by this, this unholy alliance, we can understand that there is a chance that it will only develop if there will be a significant change in government after the upcoming elections, whenever they will come. As immigration, the war in Ukraine, and economic stagnation continue to rock the European continent, the forces that champion particularly radical ideologies and simplistic solutions might continue gaining influence, and we saw how close it was in France during the last French elections. The development in France were also followed very closely by those in Israel who believe that there is no problem. There is no problem with anti-refugee policies, with anti-Islamic policies, and just the vice versa. You know, it's the ultimate good Europeans that they understand what should be done in order to overcome the common menace, the common threat. So the Israel's romance with the far right is likely not only to last, but also to flourish and to prosper. Some of the parties and the movements who are seeking rapprochements with Israel will be labeled as kosher in the future, especially if they will have positions of power in Europe. Thank you.